My daughter called me at 2 a.m. She was crying so hard I could barely understand a single word. I was sitting on my balcony in Medellin, 62 years old, a cup of coffee going cold in my hand, watching the city lights flicker across the valley below. And the first thing I felt, God forgive me, was not worry. It was a strange, quiet calm, because I had already survived the worst thing she could have done to me. She had already looked me in the eye and told me I was nothing. Let me go back to the beginning. My wife and I were married for 23 years. Her name is not important anymore. I will call her my ex-wife because that is what she is, and because the woman I thought I married turned out to be someone I never really knew at all. We met when I was 38 and she was 34. I was a civil engineer. I had my own small firm, nothing spectacular, but steady. Honest work. She was a property manager for a real estate company downtown. Sharp and organized and beautiful in a way that made you feel like you had to earn her attention. I worked hard to earn it. I thought that meant something. We had one daughter together. She was born 2 years into our marriage, and from the first moment I held her, she was everything to me. I coached her soccer team when she was 7. I drove her to every school play rehearsal in high school. When she got into college, I was the one who cried in the parking lot, while her mother stood there checking her phone. I thought my daughter and I had something unbreakable. I thought that was the one thing in my life I had gotten absolutely right. I was wrong about that too. The marriage started coming apart slowly, the way these things usually do. Not a single explosion, but 100 small silences. My ex-wife traveled more for work, or said she did. She became distant in a way that I kept telling myself was just stress, just the season of life, just something we would get through. I made excuses for her the way you make excuses for someone you have decided to love no matter what. I kept my head down, and I worked, and I told myself that stability was a form of love, that showing up every day was enough. What I did not know, what I had no idea about for the last 4 years of our marriage, was that my ex-wife had been quietly moving money, not stealing from me directly, not in a way that would have been obvious on any single bank statement. She was a property manager. She understood real estate, understood how money moves through transactions and escrow and closing costs in ways that most people never bother to learn, and she used every bit of that knowledge against me. I will tell you the specific numbers because I think people need to hear them. Over those 4 years, she directed approximately $240,000 in commissions and referral fees from deals she was quietly brokering on the side. Deals that used connections she had built through our joint network, through my professional relationships, through referrals that came from people who knew me, into a private LLC she had set up under a variation of her maiden name. I did not know the LLC existed. I did not know the account existed. I found out during the divorce proceedings when my attorney requested full financial disclosure, and her attorney made the mistake of submitting documents that were not as clean as they believed. $240,000, 23 years. And she looked at me across the mediation table like I was being unreasonable for being upset. The divorce took 14 months. I will not bore you with the details of every filing and every counterclaim, and every morning I sat in my car in a parking garage before walking into a building where someone was going to tell me something else I had lost. What I will tell you is that at the end of it, I received a settlement that was fair on paper and devastating in practice. The house sold. My firm was valued and split. I walked out of 23 years with enough to start over if I was careful, and nothing that looked like the life I had built. My daughter was 31 years old when the divorce finalized. Old enough to know better. Old enough to have asked questions. She did not ask questions. She had already chosen her side about 8 months before the proceedings ended, and her side was not mine. I understood at first. Her mother had been the emotional center of her childhood in ways I had not always recognized. I gave my daughter space. I called when I could. I told her I loved her and that I was not going anywhere. Then I found out about him. His name does not matter. I will call him what he presented himself as, a financial consultant. He was 57 years old, tan in the way that men who do not actually work outdoors are tan, with a very firm handshake and the specific kind of confidence that I now recognize as the confidence of a man who has never been genuinely tested. My ex-wife had apparently known him for 2 years before the divorce. I did not know that at the time. I found it out later, and I will get to that. Within 8 months of our divorce being finalized, they were engaged. Within 14 months, they were planning a wedding. My daughter called me to tell me about the engagement. She was excited. She told me he was wonderful, that he was successful, that he treated her mother the way her mother deserved to be treated. I said I was glad her mother was happy. I meant it, actually. I was at a point where I genuinely did not want to be angry anymore. Anger is expensive, and I had already paid too much. Then my daughter told me she was going to be the maid of honor. I told her I understood. Then she told me something else. She told me that she thought, if I was being honest with myself, I would admit that her mother had been carrying the weight of our family for years. That I had been too focused on work, too emotionally unavailable, too comfortable while her mother quietly handled everything. She had clearly been having a different set of conversations than the ones I was part of. She said, and I remember this exactly because some sentences you do not forget, she said, "He actually shows up for her, Dad. That's something you never really figured out how to do." I did not respond to that. I said goodnight. I hung up the phone. I sat in my apartment. I was renting a 2-bedroom in the same city I had lived in for 30 years because I had not yet figured out what came next. And I looked at the walls for a long time. That was the night I decided to leave. Not impulsively, I want to be clear about that. I spent 3 months making a plan. I researched cities. I looked at cost of living, at the expat communities, at the visa situations for American retirees and semi-retirees. I talked to 2 different men I had met through an online forum, both Americans, both in their 60s, both of whom had left the United States after major life transitions and had not regretted it. One of them had been in Medellin for 4 years. He told me the city would surprise me. He was right. I sublet my apartment, put the things that mattered into a storage unit, and got on a plane. I was 61 years old, and I had not started over since I was 22. And I want to tell you that it was terrifying in a way that felt almost identical to excitement. I could not always tell them apart. Medellin is not what people who have never been there imagine it to be. It sits in a mountain valley, and in the evenings the air is cool and the light turns everything gold and pink in a way that does not feel real the first few times you see it. They call it the city of eternal spring. That is not marketing language. That is just the weather. The temperature in the neighborhood where I rented my first apartment averaged about 72 degrees every single day for the first 4 months I was there, and every single day I walked outside and thought, I could get used to this. My monthly expenses ran about $2,100. That covered a furnished 2-bedroom apartment in a clean, quiet neighborhood, groceries, utilities, transportation, and enough left over to sit at a cafe most mornings with a book and a coffee that cost less than $2 and feel, for the first time in longer than I could remember, like time belonged to me. I was not waiting for anything. I was not dreading anything. I was just there, in that city, in that light, starting to remember what it felt like to be a person, rather than a role. I found a small consulting arrangement with a Colombian construction firm that needed someone with American engineering credentials to review bids on international projects. It was not demanding. I worked maybe 15 hours a week, communicated mostly by email, and it kept my mind sharp and paid for my occasional indulgences, a nicer dinner, a flight somewhere new, a long weekend in Cartagena watching the ocean. But I started exercising again. I lost 22 pounds in the first 6 months without trying very hard. I slept 8 hours a night. I will not pretend that I did not still carry grief. I did. There were mornings when I woke up, and the first thing I felt was the particular heaviness of a life that had not turned out the way I had worked for it to turn out. There were evenings when I thought about my daughter and felt something I do not have a clean word for. Not anger, not exactly sadness. More like the ache of a door you know is closed but keep walking past anyway. I let myself feel those things. I did not try to reason myself out of them or stay busy enough to avoid them. I had spent too many years doing that already. What I did instead was write. I had kept journals on and off throughout my life, But I started writing seriously in Medellin, not to publish anything, just to put things in order inside myself. I wrote about my marriage, about the specific moments I had missed or misread. I wrote about my daughter's childhood, about the good years, about the soccer games and the late-night homework sessions, and the way she used to call me at lunch from college, just to talk about nothing in particular. I wrote about what I wish I had done differently. I tried to be honest. Honesty is harder than people think when you are the one holding the pen. I also started going to a small English language church in the neighborhood. I am not going to make this into a sermon because that is not what it was for me. It was just a group of people, mostly expats, who gathered on Sunday mornings and talked about trying to live better and hold on to something larger than their own disappointments. The pastor was a man from Georgia who had been in Colombia for 11 years and had a way of talking about grace that did not sound like a performance. I needed that. I went most Sundays. It helped. Back in the United States, the wedding was planned for April. I knew about it only through the occasional text from my daughter, who maintained a relationship with me that I would describe as carefully managed. She shared information on a need-to-know basis. She was not cruel. She was just distant, in the way that people are distant when they have made a decision about you and do not want to revisit it. I accepted the terms. I kept the lines open. I told her I loved her every time we talked. That part required no effort. It was simply true. A man I had known professionally for years, an architect who had worked on several projects with my old firm, reached out to me in February. We had stayed loosely in touch after my move, occasional messages, nothing significant. But in February, he sent me a longer message. He had done some work for the financial consultant's previous firm. He had heard things. He wanted me to know, not to cause trouble, but because he thought I should be aware, especially given that my daughter was closely involved with this family now. The financial consultant had a pattern. It was not a new pattern. He had run essentially the same operation twice before in different cities, positioning himself as a wealth management expert, cultivating relationships with successful or semi-successful people through social events and referrals and the kind of low-key prestige that comes from being seen at the right places. He would establish trust over 1 to 2 years. Then he would present investment opportunities. The opportunities were structured in ways that looked legitimate on the surface but were essentially vehicles for moving money in directions his clients did not understand and would not be able to trace easily. Both previous situations had ended with people losing significant amounts of money and the consultant moving on before anything reached the level of formal legal action. He was not stupid. He stayed just inside the line, or just outside it in ways that were expensive to prove. My architect friend did not know everything. He knew enough. I sat with that information for 3 days before I decided what to do with it. I did not call my daughter immediately. I had learned by then that calling my daughter with information she did not want disrupted a process in ways that worked against me. I was not trying to win anything. I was trying to protect her. Those required different approaches. I wrote her a letter, a real letter, handwritten, which I then typed out and emailed, because I knew a physical letter would take too long. I told her what I had been told. I told her I was not asking her to believe me over her mother. I was not asking her to do anything except verify. I gave her my architect friend's contact information and told her he was willing to speak with her directly. I told her I loved her and that I would not bring it up again unless she wanted to talk about it. Then I sent it. And I went to bed, and I did not sleep for most of the night. She did not respond for 11 days. When she did respond, her message was short. She said she had spoken to my friend. She said she had done some research of her own. She said she was not ready to talk about it, but she wanted me to know she had received my letter. That was all. The wedding happened in April. I was not there. I was in Medellin, walking along the river path I had found in my first month there, the one that runs through a long park and is shaded by old trees. And I was thinking about nothing in particular, the way you think about nothing when you have finally stopped fighting your own mind. My phone was in my pocket. I was not checking it. I found out what happened at the wedding 3 days later from my daughter. There was a couple at the reception, friends of my ex-wife from years back, people who had apparently not known that my ex-wife's new husband had previously worked in the same financial circles as their own financial advisor. The wife made a comment during the cocktail hour, not a dramatic accusation, nothing raised or theatrical, just a quiet, surprised remark to the person standing next to her. I didn't realize he was still operating after what happened in Phoenix. She did not know my ex-wife was within earshot. My ex-wife heard it, asked what she meant. The woman, flustered, tried to walk it back. But other people nearby had heard. The groom was across the room. By the time he got to my ex-wife's side, she had already pulled out her phone and was looking up things she apparently should have looked up 14 months earlier. The reception did not end well. I will not exaggerate by telling you it had collapsed dramatically, because I was not there and my daughter was careful with the details she shared. What I know is that by the time my daughter texted me 3 days later, my ex-wife had consulted an attorney about the possibility of an annulment, and the financial consultant had retained his own attorney. $280,000 that my ex-wife had invested through him, money that came largely from her share of our home sale and the settlement she had received from me, was in an account structure that her new attorney described in writing as difficult to access and of unclear legal status. $280,000. That was the night my daughter called me at 2 a.m. I let the phone ring twice before I answered, not because I was hesitating, because I wanted to take one breath and make sure that when I picked up, I was the father she needed me to be, and not anything smaller than that. She was crying. She said she was sorry. She said it more than once, and each time she said it, she sounded younger, the way people sound when they have run out of their adult composure, and what is left is something more honest. She said she had been unfair to me. She said she had listened to a version of our family's story that was not complete, and she had let that version make her cruel to me, and she was sorry. I told her I knew. I told her that I had never stopped being her father, and I was not going to start now. I told her that the things that happened between her mother and me were between her mother and me, and that none of it had ever been her fault, and none of it had ever changed what I felt about her. I told her that I had moved to a beautiful city, and that I was sleeping 8 hours a night, and that I had lost 22 pounds, and that I wanted her to come visit me when she was ready. Because I wanted to show her that a person could lose almost everything they had planned for and still end up somewhere that felt like grace. She laughed a little at that, through the crying. We talked for an hour and 40 minutes. I know because I checked my phone afterward, and I sat there in the dark with the city lights below me, and I felt something I had not felt clearly in years. Not triumph, not vindication, exactly. Something quieter than that. Something that felt like a long-held breath finally, slowly, let go. I want to say something about my ex-wife before I finish, because I think it matters. I do not know everything that will happen with her legal situation. I know she is in a difficult position, and I know that some of the money she put into that man's hands may be gone in ways that are very hard to recover from. I will not pretend I felt nothing when I heard that, but I will tell you what I felt was not satisfaction. What I felt was something closer to grief. The old kind. The kind that has been sitting in the back of a room for a long time and does not need much invitation to come forward. 23 years is 23 years. I mourned that marriage long before the divorce was final. I did not need to mourn it again, but I acknowledged it. I think that matters. I did not call her. I did not send a message. What happened to her was the result of choices she made, and the space between her choices and mine was not mine to fill. Some distances are healthy. Some silence is not abandonment. It is just the appropriate end of something that has already ended. My daughter flew to Medellin in June. She stayed for 10 days. I showed her the river path and the cafe where I read in the mornings and the neighborhood market where I buy my produce from a woman who has been selling vegetables in the same spot for 30 years and always gives me more cilantro than I ask for. We talked for hours on that balcony, the same balcony where I had taken the 2 a.m. call, watching the valley. We talked about her childhood. We talked about the things I'd missed and the things I'd gotten right, and the difference between the two, which is a harder line to draw than most people want to admit. We talked about her plans and my plans and what we both wanted the next years to look like. On the last evening before her flight home, she asked me if I had been angry. Not about the divorce, not about her mother, about her, about the things she had said to me. I thought about it for a moment. I told her the truth. I told her that yes, there had been anger, and that I had let myself feel it, and then I had set it down because I could not afford to carry all the way to meditation. I told her that I had chosen to believe the version of her that called soccer fields and stayed on the phone for nothing in particular, and came to Medellin with 10 days and an open heart. I told her that version was more real to me than the version that had said what she said on that phone call a year before, and that I intended to keep believing it. She hugged me at the airport for a long time. I am 62 years old, and I have built things and lost things and started over in a city where I did not speak the language, and I have learned, slowly and at significant cost, that the things that last are simpler than the things we spend our lives protecting. Being present, being honest, being willing to start again. I am still in Medellin. The coffee is still $2. The evenings are still gold and pink over the valley. I am still waking up 8 hours later than I fell asleep. Still walking the river path. Still writing. Still going to that small church on Sunday mornings where the pastor from Georgia talks about grace like he actually believes in it. My daughter is coming back in December. She says she is thinking about learning Spanish. I told her I would introduce her to the woman at the vegetable stand, who has more patience than most language teachers I have ever met, and who will give her extra cilantro whether she wants it or not. That is what 62 looks like when you finally stop running from the wrong things and start walking toward the right ones, slowly, one city block at a time, grateful for the extra cilantro.